Hey, how's it going, everybody? It's Ryan from Dirt Bike Project Channel, and today we're going to be rebuilding the forks on my 2006 KDX 200. I'm also going to be putting in brand new Racetech gold valves and new valving for me, and I'm going to show you how to do that today. So to do this, we're going to need a bunch of special tools. It's not very hard to do, but you do need a few special tools. So let me show you some of the things you're going to need here. Torque wrenches in a couple of sizes. There's the compression stack needs to be torqued down, and that's an inch-pound. So you're going to need something that goes down to about 25 inch-pounds, I believe, is the torque on that for this fork. And then a bigger one for the bottom cap. And you'll notice here I have an Allen bolt. That's a 14 millimeter hex key, Allen key, and you'll need, that's the size on the bottom on this particular model. So you're going to need something that you can torque that down with. So just a regular Allen will work if you don't torque it, but in order to get the right torque, this is the way to go. The cap on the top of the fork is a pretty big one. I believe it's a 30 millimeter. Yes, it's a 30 millimeter. I don't know if you can see that in the video, but to get that off, you'll need a pretty good sized socket. A crescent wrench may also work for that. I also have a separate video where I built this tool. It's not absolutely necessary, but it's just a piece of pipe with a nut welded on the end of it. And it has to be hollow or else it will not work because the damper rod has to fit inside of that tool. This is a 27 millimeter size head, and that fits inside, and you'll see how that works later in the video. You can also just use pressure on it with a piece of PVC pipe. That's how I got the first one out, so I could actually build the tool in the first place. So there's a lot of ways of building that. You can check out that video if you're interested in building that tool. You're gonna need a file, and this is only for replacing my valving. If you're just replacing your oil, some of this stuff isn't going to be necessary. Some screwdrivers and picks to get the clips out. Various hand tools. I've got some sockets here for taking some of the pieces apart internally. 17 millimeter wrench. I need some Loctite. This is a fork seal driver. You're going to need one of those. I already did the other fork in preparation for this video, so I'm putting in new fork seals. This is the other seal. Obviously you need some oil, whatever you're going to run in your bike. And this is handy. You can make this. This is my fork oil level tool. You'll see that later. The other thing that I need for mine is, I've got this kind of just off to the side, is a hacksaw and a tape measure, because I'm going to be changing the preload in my bike, and I'm going to show you how I'm doing that later as well. So let's get started. The first thing we're going to do is take the this boot off of the fork, and it's pretty easy, just a couple of Phillips screws. And it's easiest, I think, on these. They stick really bad to the metal, the rubber does, and they seem to stick to the fork tubes. You do not want to scratch up your fork tubes doing this, so be gentle with it, and watch out if you're going to be using any kind of metal on to get this pried apart. A lot of times I'll just take this part and geez, these ones are pretty tough. See how I had to even pry that off of the rubber? And just take those off. It's just easier. Sometimes you can get them to come off without using metal, so you don't have to mess up your fork tubes. But they stick pretty good. Once you get them loose, they're fine. And this bottom one can be a little tricky. Kind of the same deal. Wrong screwdriver. Same thing, these can be really stuck on. And this, you just have to work the rubber off a little bit at a time, go around. These probably have been on here a long time, so they're pretty stuck. There it goes. All right, and then we can clean this up and put it to the side. I like to put the screws back in the little in these clips, so I don't lose the screws. The other thing you'll need in this is somewhere to put the oil. I just have an oil drain pan here. And if I come over my other bench, if you're not doing valving changes, you're not going to need any of this, but these are all my new gold valve shims, and I need a caliper for measuring the sizes of those. So if you're doing a gold valve installation, you'll need that. I like to just give everything a quick wipe down. It's just easier to work on things when they're cleaner and you get less dirt and things in there. We're going to clean this up nicer once everything is taken apart. But I do like to get some of the big stuff off first, just so it's a little easier to work on. Okay, make sure you use soft jaws. When you're gripping this in the vise, you don't want to crush this or mar up the surface, but we need to hold this so that we can get this end cap cracked loose. 30mm socket. Have your oil bucket ready. When this comes off, we can dump the oil out. Alright, so my threads are loose. I'm going to loosen this. So now the fork tube will freely slide down. So if it wasn't gripped in the vise, it would just fallen down. So you want to kind of watch out for that if you're holding this in a different way. Another easy way to do this on the bike, I can't do that right now, my bike isn't put together enough, but you can put the fork tube in the triple clamp and just clamp the lower triple clamp and not the upper, and that's a good way to hold the fork tube, and so you can crack that top nut loose. Sometimes they're pretty good. So now I'm just going to dump the oil out in my oil bucket. This part can definitely get messy with all the oil, so I dumped out as much as I could. There's always more in the bottom of these things, so when we start taking this apart further, just kind of watch out for that. I have lots of rags around. All right, I'm going to put this back in the soft jaws, but this time I would like to put the top or the bottom fork tube in here. Let me see if I can adjust this so you can see it well. I do have some oil coming off of this thing still. Oil everywhere. That's one of the things with this kind of work. I try to keep it as clean as I can, but it's an oily mess for the most part. The next step here is to take this top end cap off. And to do this, I'm going to grab a hold and I just need to push this down a little bit. Now this can snap off, so kind of be careful, but I'm exposing this nut right here. That's what we're going to be taking apart. So on this bike is a 17mm wrench. And I'm going to stick this on here. Once I have this on here, this spring shouldn't come up there too much, but just kind of want to be careful. If it slips off, it'll kind of snap up on you, so just kind of watch for that. So what I'm going to do here is I'm loosening this 17mm nut this way so that it comes away from the cap. Looks like I might have got it. You can see here it kind of snaps back in place. There we go. So I've backed this nut away from the top cap. So now I should be able to take the top cap off. Now in my case, this is being a bit stubborn. So if you take this 17 millimeter nut, and the end of the threads is right here, so once you get to the end, you actually have something you can hang on to and get some leverage here. The biggest problem is this spring here. This is not the most ideal. There we go. There we go. So now I can just spin that off of here. Again, being careful that this spring doesn't snap on you. And then I can pull that back and just gently let that come off. And so there's a couple of pieces on mine, these locator washers. And later I'm going to show you, this is the preload adjuster. The previous owner used PVC pipe. The stock ones for this bike are just some metal tubes that you can cut. PVC works just fine. I'm not sure what size this is. It looks like 1 inch, but I'd have to verify that. So I'm going to put these pieces to the side. And now, be careful with making a mess here, but the spring can come out now. You will probably have some oil at the bottom of this. Put the spring to the side, also going to be cleaned up in a minute. Okay, so this is the damper rod, and there's still a bunch of oil on the bottom of this. And this is where that special tool I mentioned earlier is going to come in handy, because this is the special tool. Again, just a piece of pipe with a nut on the end. I'm going to take this 17 millimeter nut off of here. I had to reef it down a little bit hard getting that other end cap off. Let's see if I can get this off of here. I might have to grab this with a pair of pliers to break it loose. Be very careful doing this. You don't want to mar up and scratch this or crush it or anything like that. I'm going to just put a rag over it so that it doesn't do that. So I can get just a little enough grip to crack this loose. There we go. No big deal. Okay, so let's take this nut off. So now I've got this is actually my torque wrench, but in the bottom of this, there's this hex bolt. That's our 14 millimeter hex bolt. Make sure you're on left. And this fits down in here. Gotta be careful not to mar up those threads, and it will engage with the damper rod. And then I can actually get this apart. Twisting the whole thing. Grip it a little tighter. Alright, I am going to reposition this. So I can get some better leverage. This one is proving to be much tighter than the other one. My homemade soft jaws are not surviving this. I've gotten this bottom part cracked loose. Get this back out of here. I've got this bottom part cracked loose, but the top here, I need to get a little bit more grip on this tool. The other one came out no problem, so I'm going to need something to either thread on the end of that, or I can just put some pliers on here. There's a lot of ways of making that. The other one was a lot easier than this one. Let me get something to get this apart with. Hopefully you can see this now. I've got the just cut up some more wood to make some new soft jaws, and I'm just gonna grab this pipe with a pair of pliers so that I can grip this, get this to come loose. Oh, that actually came pretty easy. I didn't need a whole lot more force than just with my hands. It's coming out fine now. Okay, what I'm gonna do before I get to the end here is get my oil pan. The oil is gonna drain out the bottom on this end. I'm gonna put my oil pan underneath to catch the oil that's gonna come from that. I couldn't really put my oil pan under it because of how my bench is, so I'll just do this on the ground. I just trying to not to make a huge mess here. I'm just twisting on both sides with my special tool and with my socket here. There we go. There's the oil. So this is where we'll be rebuilding. This is the compression valving stack right here, and this is where we're going to be putting the gold valves later. But for now, I'm just going to set this to the side, and I'm going to try to get as much of this oil out of here as I can. And you'll hear there's things coming out the bottom. That's just the damper rod that actually will not come all the way out. Actually it will, because I took the nut off, and that's okay. We're going to set that aside as well. I'm just going to set it here in this oil bucket. The only reason that came out is because I took the nut off. I forgot I did that earlier. And take out my special tool out of the top, and now all we really have, I got to dump out some more of these parts. So again, we got oil coming out both ends here. I'm going to dump out the other parts. There is the cartridge, and there's this piece at the bottom, guard. I'm not sure what that piece is called, to be honest with you, but it's basically just this sits in here, and I'm not sure if it's a splash guard or what, but it's kind of almost like a washer in between the cartridge tube here and the bottom of the outer fork tube, and that's it. So now we basically just have a hole through here, and the only thing holding this together is this clip and the actual fork seal itself that we're going to take apart in just a minute. So now that we've got all the oil drained out, I'm just going to wipe this off and get it back in the vise. Okay, we're back up here on the vise, and the next thing I need to do is take out this retaining clip here. Now, if you were just changing your oil and not your seals, you might not even have to do this part, but most people, when they do their forks, they're doing their seals. And so, anyway, this one's pretty easy. You just pry on these little spots they've got in there so you can get underneath it and just kind of pop it out of there. So now that this is all free, make sure you have the bottom tube gripped good in the vise. And this comes out, and you can just kind of hammer it out. As you can see, it takes a little bit of force to get the seal out of there. So here is the dust seal. This is the actual fork seal itself. That's the part that blows, and once it's blown, it does not, your tubes start leaking, and junk starts getting in your oil, that kind of thing. And then here's your bushings. So you want to inspect these bushings and make sure the Teflon coatings aren't coming off. Now this one gets smashed in. The coating on this one is actually on the inside, which we'll look at in just a second. But you want to make sure it's not, the Teflon coating isn't all coming off on these. These actually look pretty good. You want to make sure you get any of the metal filings or any gunk off of these. These actually look really good. And then we'll check this one in a second. So basically, we're just going to take these off the end of the fork tube. So there's the dust seal, which in my case, I'm going to reuse. It's just a dust seal, and I don't have new ones. I'm going to put the new fork seal on. So this one's actually is going in the trash. And then this is like a retaining washer. And then here's our first bushing. And again, we're going to just look on the inside of this. Let's see if you can see this. I don't know how well you can see that in the video, but you want to look around on the inside, same thing on the outside, this other bushing, and just make sure that it's not, the Teflon isn't tore up on it. This one actually looks like it has some dirt or something. No, the Teflon's tearing just a little bit on that. I think that's okay, but next time I rebuild them, I'll probably put new ones on just to make sure that it's good. I'm going to try to, I really hope that you can see that. I don't know how in focus that is, but you can see how this Teflon's bubbling a little bit right here. And that's going to wear off and eventually it'd be a problem. So I'm going to use these one more time, but next time I'm going to put new ones on. Same thing here. You might be able to see this better since it's on the outside, but this one looks really good. None of the Teflon's coming off. It's got that nice coating. And so I'm not even going to take this off the fork tube, but if you want to take it off, you can put a screwdriver in this slot right here and pry it open a little bit, and then it slides right off the end of the fork tube here. But I'm going to leave that on. Just going to clean up these parts and put it back together when we're ready. Okay, I'm going to try to give you a closer look of this stuff because it is definitely small and harder to see, especially in the video. This is the compression valving stack here that is stock on the bike, and this is the plug that went in the bottom of the fork tube. I'm going to take, on this bike, I'm going to take off there's a little plastic or rubber cover in here over the compression adjuster. It's a little bit of a pain to get out, but I'm going to take this out. Sometimes these would be taken out when you take the forks off if you wanted to, but this is what you would do. You'd take this off to adjust the compression while it was on the bike. So anyway, it's just a little plastic piece that fits in there. And then I like to actually back these all the way out. Now normally, that's already backed all the way out. Normally I would make sure I know what adjustment was on here, but since I'm putting in all new valving, I'm just going to put in the recommended stuff from Race Tech and go from there. So I don't have to remember any valving in my case, but if you have one where you don't want to lose your settings, make sure you count how many clicks from seated, just like you would on a carburetor or something, and just so that you can get the same adjustment back. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to do this valving stack. So the first thing is I'm going to put this in the vise, and I need to, same thing, soft jaws, make sure you don't mar up all the surfaces. And the first thing we need to do is file the peening off of the top of this. This is peened over, so you can't actually take that nut off. So we need to file this off flat. Basically, when you've touched all of the nut, you've probably filed it off flat. And that's enough. So we should be able to get that off now. So now I've got this 12 millimeters. See, maybe it's 10. 10 on this one. This is a 10 millimeter nut, and now I should be able to take this off. Okay, so there's my nut, and then the first thing I'd like to do, you want to make sure that these threads are nice and clean. Good chamfer on there is good. I'm actually going to take this whole thing off. This is the stock valving stack. So there's a little spacer type of deal in here. I had to do this on the other side too. I had to kind of pry up on this little basket kind of thing here. There's a little spring under here. I'm going to keep all these parts just because I don't like throwing away OEM parts that I'm replacing, just in case I ever decide to go back, which I probably won't. But so this is where now I have a little bit of room. I can use my file I need to chamfer the top of this. So nice and light on the file. You don't need a lot here, but you want to dress up these threads so that the nut goes on and off nice and easy. This is kind of a one-time deal. Next time I go through and do this, this will already be done. I won't have to do this again. So I just like to go up on an angle, get all the burrs off. Nice and round. Take your time here. Don't want to take off too much, but you just want to make sure that we got a nice chamfered edge. It might take you a couple of tries to get this right, but I just want to make sure this nut goes on and off nice and easy. There we go. That's not bad at all. Obviously a little bit of drag, it's never going to be perfect, but that goes on and off nice. It doesn't strip the nut or anything like that, so we're good there. And now that comes off easily. Okay, so there you go. There's that. I'm gonna take this is the crush washer. We're gonna reuse that. Normally you're supposed to use a new one every time you do this. I just reuse them until they leak, and honestly I've almost never bought new ones of these. They last a really long time in my experience. So I am just going to go over and we're going to clean this off. So I'm going to spray this out with compressed air and put some contact cleaner on here and use a nylon wire brush. I've got one right here. I'm going to get all the old Loctite and things out of the threads and clean this up really nice. Okay, we're over at my other bench where I've got all my shims laid out. So now I've got this all cleaned up. Compressed air, blow any of those metal shavings out. You want this nice and clean. So I already have this all laid out here according to how this works, and I want to talk about some of the challenges that I had when I built my stack. The first thing that I didn't understand about the instructions is that on top of the scold valve on the what we would call the rebound side, the rebound damping happens elsewhere in the fork, but on the rebound side there's supposed to be a check plate is what they call it in the instructions. I couldn't figure out what that was, so I tried to use a regular shim for the check plate, and that does not work. The stack is too tall. And the reason is the check plate is special. So this is the check plate. It looks just like any of the other shims, but you'll notice that the hole in the middle is bigger than the hole. So these shims go on top of, on this shaft, and they fit like they're supposed to. This check plate, there's a special cupped piece here that actually fits into a recess right here on the gold valve. And it can't do that unless that hole is bigger. So these are the check plates, and it took me a while to figure that out. So that's probably the biggest thing that tripped me up on this. There's this little spring goes in here, but that's how it fits together. The spring goes in between here. I'll show you how that goes together in a minute, but that was probably my biggest confusion when putting this together, is that these are the check plates, the best I can tell, because they have the right size hole. There's two of these, one for each fork, and the rest of the pieces in the kit did not have a hole that size, so I can only assume that's the check plate, and then it went together perfectly fine after that. The other thing is they tell you to put a base plate on here, and when I put their thicker base plate on, they provide a whole bunch of those. Again, the stack was just too tall. I couldn't even get the nut on it. So it says in the instructions that you can use a spacing shim instead. So that's what I did. I just used one of the thicker shims. I just used one, and that seems to work fine. So that's how I decided to put mine together. So according to the instructions, you basically just build this from the bottom up. So I have my quote-unquote base plate. It doesn't look like a plate much, but it's one of these thicker shims. So I'm going to start at this end. So this is I just grabbed one of the 0.15 shims, which is one of the thicker shims, and put it on there. And then this is my stack. The only reason I'm not going to tell you the sizes is because everybody's stack is different. So I'm just going to put mine together the way that I was given in the Race Tech instructions. You're going to have probably a different stack than mine. So this is the high-speed compression stack. You kind of build it from bottom up. And then there's the crossover shim right here. And then this is my low-speed stack. This is a thicker one, that's why it's separate. So that is my compression stack. And then after that comes the gold valve. So this is very directional. Make sure you do this correctly. The compression side has more oil flow, and so all these ports on the back here, these 6 ports that come up go against the compression stack. So it goes this way, and you'll see that this might be a little hard to see in the video, but when I put this plate over the top of here, it covers these 3 ports, and those 3 ports are kind of they don't do any rebound damping per se, but they allow on the rebound stroke for the oil to come back through. Okay, so this is I guess we'd call it the rebound side, even though it's not really doing any rebound damping in this case. So then this check plate goes on there, and the spring, and then this is the cupped piece. Now again, you want to make sure that this fits down in there. Now, before I put this together, this is something they say in the instructions is very important as well, is that when this is all tightened down, let me actually put this back on. See how there's the shoulder here with the threads? That shoulder needs to be covered by at least a 1/2 millimeter according to the instructions when this is all down. So let me make sure this is seated correctly. See how it clipped in and it's riding inside the gold valve. I don't want to see the shaft in here. This has got to be tall enough. And it looks very close to right because when I put the nut on, I'm going to put Loctite on this in a second. Now this is all tightened down. That's what it looks like. And see how it comes right to the top here. But the important part is that this does not catch on the where the threads end on here. So that has to be, that size is very, very important. So make sure you follow the instructions. If you have any questions, I'm sure you can call Race Tech, but I'm not affiliated with them at all. By the way, this is just what I decided to put on my bike, and this is based on the instructions. So the way that this works is when the oil is forced downward through here on the compression stroke, it bends these shims here, the shim stack that I built. And then on the rebound stroke, the oil comes back through and it needs to be unrestricted. And so this is very easy for the oil to push out of the way, and the oil goes backwards up through here. And that's what that check valve thing is for. So you have good compression damping this way, and then this way it just lets the oil back up through. And then the rebound damping is done in the other parts of the fork on this model. So I'm going to put a little bit of Loctite on here and torque it over on the other bench. Okay, we're back over to the other bench here. I'm just going to take this off and get some Loctite on it. This is spring loaded. Just be a little careful you don't lose the pieces. We don't want to make this dirty. I'm going to grab my Loctite here. Don't want this coming apart while you're riding the bike, that's for sure. Make sure you don't use too much. You don't want any Loctite down in the orifices or anything. Just a little bit on here to keep that nut from coming off. I'm not even really squeezing the tube. I mean, you don't need very much. It's a really small nut. And then I like to make sure that this cupped washer here, the silver one, isn't recessed down in that gold valve like it's supposed to be. And then hand tighten this on, and that looks correct because my shaft comes up, so that's what I had on the bench. So it's not bound up, it's working the way it should. Now it needs to be torqued. And I had this set up from the other fork. This was 25 inch-pounds on this bike, which actually does not feel like a lot. That's it right there, 25 inch-pounds. Doesn't feel like I'm hardly tightening at all, but that's the spec. And so you can see there's a little bit of Loctite there. It's not running down into the holes or anything, so that's good. So I'm just going to take this crush washer that was on there before. I don't want to forget to put that on, so I'm going to clean that up real quick, put that on, and this stack is ready to be inserted back into the forks. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to go and clean all those other parts up. You can use a parts washer, soap and water, or whatever. Make sure that they're clean and dry. I don't think you guys want to watch me clean parts, but I'm going to let this Loctite dry. I'm going to let that sit there. I'm going to put these parts away, and when I get all the pieces clean, we're going to come back and put the fork back together. Okay, before we put the fork back together, I do need to cut this preload spacer, and I talked about this earlier. The stock one is a metal tube. This is PVC, it works just fine. And the other side I cut to 65 millimeters. So I'm going to do the same thing here. I'm not really talking about suspension tuning in this video, it's just how to rebuild it. So I'm not going to go into the details on how I figured out how long that is. But for me, it's going to be 65 millimeters. So I'm going to cut this and clean it up. No matter how many times I've done this, it's very difficult to get perfectly straight. So obviously you don't want any of this plasticky stuff in your forks, but we're gonna take this off of here and make sure it's the right length and that it's flat. I don't know if you can see that, but it's not perfectly flat, and so I'm just gonna file that down. I'm gonna try to make it the right length though. It looks like it's about 1 millimeter long on the longer side, so I'm just gonna file down the longer side. There we go, there's my preload spacer. So I'm gonna put that on in just a minute. So let's get this thing put back together. And now I have my nice clean fork tube here. Okay, hopefully you can see this a little better. So the first step in putting this back together is we've got to put the fork tube back together. And we got to put the seals on and the bushings and all that. So there's a specific order for this. So remember, we took this off earlier. This is the bushing that goes on here. And then there's this little washer. Holds everything together. And then I have a new fork seal. So you want to be careful not to wreck the little edges that are on this. And normally you put a little bit of seal grease or fork oil or something on here. I have fork oil sitting here, so I'm going to use that. Just get a little bit on your finger or something and just put some in here. And that way there's lubrication so that that rubber doesn't catch and tear the small part of that seal that actually does the sealing. Definitely don't want to mess that up. The other thing that it's a good idea to do is you can put some plastic wrap or something over the end of the tube so that it doesn't catch. But if you're careful, I haven't really had any problem with that. This is also directional. So this flat side goes up. You can see the other side, it has, you can see the insides. The writing goes up. So put that down over here. And I like to not put it down here on this, past this part, although I don't think it hurts it. I've done that a couple times by accident and it's okay. And then the dust seals last. Okay. So now we're going to insert this tube in here, and there's several recesses here, and you'll be able to see that this bushing goes in the first one, and then the next one is the seal and all that. So we're going to put that in here. I'm going to back this seal up a little bit. So this is where we need our fork seal driver. So I've got mine right here. And you want to drive that bushing in. You want to make sure that it's nice and square before you start hammering on it. So you hear the difference? When I hit the bottom, I've got much more solid. So that's where it needs to be. So the bushing's in, and now we need to push in the fork seal. Same thing here, make sure you get everything lined up good before you start hammering on it so you don't mess up the edges. Just kind of start going gently at first. And then, since this is rubber, there'll be a little bit less of a difference, but you can kind of feel when it bottoms out. And then the dust seal. Same thing, make sure it gets seated in there before you're hammering on it. And then if you've done this right, you should see the little groove that this clip goes on. And these clips, this style is usually pretty easy to get in. But you want to make sure that the clip is engaged in that lip all the way around. So use a screwdriver or something and push it in there and make sure that it's in there. See how I heard that click in right there? I can see that. I want to make sure it's in the lip all the way around. If that's not all the way in, it'll fling out of there and your forks will come apart. No good. Okay, so now we've got our fork tubes back together. So I'm going to compress that all the way. And the next step is to put the new compression stack in on the bottom and our damper rods and all that. So I got to get all those parts together. Okay, so this is the cartridge. Now before I put this back together, that special tool, this is that hex part that I'm talking about. So this damper rod goes back up in here like this. And it sticks out, so when it's together inside, that hollow tube goes over the top of this and engages with this so that you can tighten this up. So this inside tightens up right inside here. That's the threads that this is going to tighten up into. So that's how that works. So now this is a part that's in here. Again, I don't actually know the name of that part or why it's there, but it's kind of a washer. You can see that it's going to be bolted into the bottom of the tube. So I'm going to stick this in the end. And then in the bottom I can see my threads, and I need to put some Loctite on this before I get it put together. Don't forget this crush washer. I did that on my other one. Kind of frustrating because I'm going to have to put it all back together or just risk it and hope it doesn't leak. But I did forget it on my other one, so I'm going to have to go back and pay attention to that. So I'll get some Loctite on those threads. And this is where that special tool comes in handy. If I can find it on my SE workbench here. So I'm going to stick it in there. Probably can't see that, it's probably off camera, but I got that engaged in there to make sure you can see that. So I put in my special tool, it's engaged in there, and I can use that now to screw this in. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is this needs to be tightened to 52 foot-pounds on this bike. I'll put my cap on my Loctite. Looks like it was set from last time. All right, so now we're tight. Okay, so just like when for whatever reason, this side has been a little bit more problematic. So I don't know if you can, let me check the video, make sure you can see this. I'm just gonna grab onto my special tool, some pliers. Obviously, there's a lot of ways of doing that, but I need to have some leverage here. All right, make sure this is nice and tight. Go right there's my click. There's my 52 foot-pounds, and we're in. So now I'm going to take out my special tool, set it aside. I'm not going to need it again. So now you can see that. Let me show this to you. This is all tightened in, and if you look down the fork tube, you know, this obviously there's no oil in it, so this comes out really easy now. It's a damper rod, but everything's all put together the way it's supposed to be. So I put the fork tube, the bottom tube in the soft jaws again, vertically. We're gonna put oil in here. Now the first thing I like to do is put that nut back on the top here. And that gives me something I can grab onto. As you can see, this tube likes to go down inside, and when you put the spring on, you can't, it's really hard to get to, and that nut gives you something to grab onto. And besides, when we get everything put together, it's gonna have to go on anyway. So this is a good time to have that nut on there. All right, so I like to put that nut on. There it is. So we're gonna put some oil in here. Now we're gonna measure this. My fork oil level is 140 millimeters. My bench is kind of tall. I'm actually gonna stand up over here, dump some in. And then what you want to do, now there's oil up to about here. You've got to bleed this. You've got to go through nice and slow and get the oil all into the dampers and orifices. Oh, there we go. I'm sucking oil now. Now it's a lot harder to pull. That's a good sign. A lot easier to push in than it is to pull out. You don't want any air. So the other thing I like to do when I'm bleeding these is I look down in and make sure the oil level's higher than the damper rod or the cartridge in there, and it's not. So I'm going to add some more oil in there. I can hear the bubbles bubble in there, so you want to get all that air out of there. It has to be completely bled. I probably will need more oil. This is the end of that quart. I barely have enough oil to cover the cartridge in there, so it does need some more. I expected that because I have 2 quarts of oil here, and it's supposed to take a quart and a half or something, quart and a quarter. So I expected to have to open another one. Alright, let's see what we got now. If I look in there. Okay, I've got oil up a little higher now. Alright, that's much better. Now I'm going to take this up too. Just make sure that's all bled. Now you want to be careful doing this. Again, like I was mentioning earlier, I don't really like going up above the race there on the seal, so I go about that tall when I see it and then come back down. Just want to make sure that there's no other air in there. Bleed this damper rod a little bit more. All seems good. I don't hear any more gurgling. There's no weird spots in there. So now I've got my fork oil setting tool. This is, you can make one of these if you have a syringe, but these are marked in millimeters. So I've got 140 millimeters here, and all I have to do is put it in and suck the oil out, and then I'll know it's the right height. But it's not tall enough yet. I'm gonna add a little more oil. Should be plenty at this point. Gonna bleed it one more time just to make sure. No catches or weird spots, feels good. And then all I gotta do is stick this in here. That's 140 millimeters. And I just suck it out. 140 millimeters, here we go. There we go. So now I know it's at 140 millimeters because I just sucked air. So I'm just going to put this back in, save for later. All right, so now my fork oil is set, oil level. So now it's time to put the spring in and put everything back together. So I'm going to grab my parts for the top. So I've got my end cap, locating washers, the preload spacer, and of course the spring. All right, so this is kind of the tricky part. I'm actually going to raise the camera up a little bit so you can see what I'm doing here. This spring goes around the damper rod, and once you put it in, it's really hard to get out. And when you start taking the spring out, you're going to spill oil all over the place. So there's a couple of strategies to make this easier. First of all, make sure this nut is on there, because you're going to need it anyway. Bring this damper rod all the way out until it stops. And one way you can do this is put a piece of hose on here that fits, and then run the hose up through the spring. That works pretty good. I didn't have any hose on hand that was the right size, so I'm not going to do it that way. I'm just going to finagle it here. So I am going to use my just a pick tool here to basically hang on to it as I go down. So it's a little tedious putting it on, but if you keep the damper rod, I'm up in my ceiling here. If you hold it as long as possible, keep it up, and then if you're fast, oh, I missed, you can mostly catch it. There, I was fast enough that time. If you lose it down in here, you can use a combination of needle nose pliers and picks to pick it up. The hose idea makes it a lot simpler, and they sell tools that actually thread onto that you can run up through there and pull it out, and that makes it a lot easier. So now that it's up there, I really don't want to lose it. So I'm just going to put this cap on temporarily. Obviously that's not all the parts, but just enough so that it can fall down and I don't have to worry about it. Now I can wipe my hands off and get ready for this next part. All right, now this part has to go on. I need my 17 millimeter wrench, and I need my big giant 30 millimeter socket. Make sure it's righty tighty for what we're doing. Got all my parts. This actually might be easier on a little bit of an angle than going way up high like this, but all right. So what I'm going to do is, now that I have everything on hand and within reach, I am going to pick this up so that it's as long as it goes. I take this cap off, and then I'm going to put the spacer on. This is where it starts getting tricky, because now when I put this spacer on here, it's longer than the damper rod, so it can be a bit of a pain. So I'm going to kind of do what I did earlier and just stick this piece under there like that, so the rebound spacer is kind of stuck under that nut. Again, you want to, if you bump it, it'll all come apart, but I'm going to put that on there because I know that's what I need. And then I'm going to thread this on. I'm just going to hold this so that it can't come apart. And then I can thread that all the way on there. Oops, see, I already knocked it off of there. That's okay. I got plenty of threads on there, so we're all good to go. So what I want to do is do the same thing I did earlier, and I want to thread that all the way on, as far as it'll go. And in my case, it looks like I need to move that 17 millimeter nut down a little bit further. There we go. So I've gone all the way down until it can't really go anymore. All right. Okay, so then what I need to do is tighten the nut and the top cap together, kind of like a jam nut. So I get my wrench, my big socket. Some of this stuff might require 3 hands. A buddy might be helpful in some of these. Then I'm just going to tighten these together. There we go, and that's all together. So now the only thing left to do is to screw this together. So I'm going to raise the fork tube and screw that together. What I'm going to do in my case is, these have a torque specification as well, and they're a lot easier to torque once they're in the triple clamps on the bike. So I'm actually going to torque this top cap that's in the bike. However, we are done. That's how you do that. That's how you put it back together. There is the fork boot here that we're going to slide on. It's pretty self-explanatory. It's the same as how it came off. I haven't cleaned this one yet, but this is the boot that'll go over that. So it just slides down over the end, and that's it. So it's not very hard to do. It takes a little bit of time and some special tools, but not really all that hard, especially if you have the right tools. So thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed and learned something from it. This is my first time doing the Race Tech valving, and I just did it according to the instructions. It wasn't too hard other than those things that I noted. So good luck on yours, and I'll see you next time.